The emergency convocation opened under white gold light that made every delegation look equally exposed and equally small, which was the point of the chamber's architecture, and, on that day, its central irony. The Thessaly had arrived in ceremonial war harness, 6 of them standing behind their led envoy in a display that translated cleanly across cultures as triumph before verdict. At the center dais, High Commander Sam did not bow to the speaker, did not acknowledge procedural precedents, and did not pretend this was an inquiry. He came to stage a correction. Holographic panels bloomed around him in concentric rings, each one showing the same 3-dimensional rendering of a human neural map, rotating in pale blue and threat red. The subtitles identified the source as cooperative neural cartography, gathered from human pilots in joint defense programs near the border. No one in the hall missed the word cooperative, or the way Thessaly legal counsel had insisted on it. Sam's voice carried, with military precision, each sentence measured for humiliation rather than persuasion. Honored Counsel, for cycles we have tolerated the strategic irresponsibility of the Terran Compact because we believed their instability was developmental. We now possess direct biological evidence that this species cannot maintain coherent war cognition under stress. Observe this recursive anomaly. A section of cortex enlarged, then linked in rapid pulses to memory clusters and valuation networks that flickered with prioritized ethical tags. Threat stimulus activates memory retrieval. Memory retrieval activates moral conflict assessment. Moral conflict delays terminal action. Then threat stimulus reactivates. Looping, recursing, stalling. This is not discipline. This is paralysis wrapped in sentiment. He switched to combat overlays from old anti-piracy exercises where human pilots had delayed fire while civilian transponders were uncertain. Thessaly analysts had marked those seconds as indecision failures. The same records, presented without their civilian context, looked damning enough to species that equated speed with virtue. By the 3rd hour of the emergency session, Sam had moved from data to doctrine and from doctrine to accusation. No disciplined warrior civilization tolerates this structure, he said. The human brain binds fear, memory, and ethical self-questioning in one unstable circuit. They are self-contradicting mammals who hesitate at the edge of violence, then overcompensate. Such volatility at a major hyperlane intersection is a galaxy-level risk. Therefore, the Thessaly Command will assume protective military supervision of human border systems pending indefinite cognitive reform. The chamber murmured in layered frequencies. The Kith avians folded their wings tight against their backs, an old sign of alarm. The merchants of Pax exchanged encrypted sideband traffic so quickly their translation icons blurred. Delegates from former Thessaly client states stared at their desks instead of at Sam, a caution learned over generations. The speaker asked whether the council should interpret protective supervision as annexation. Sam turned his predatory profile toward the central ring and answered with theatrical patience. Annexation is a legal term for equal parties in dispute. This is custodial intervention. When children seize navigation controls, adults take the bridge. On the upper tier, Ambassador Catherine Hayes sat perfectly still, hands clasped over a black tablet, expression neutral enough to be mistaken for fatigue by anyone unfamiliar with human diplomacy. She had prepared for intimidation, for legal traps, even for fabricated telemetry. She had not expected the Thessaly neurocartography to be unveiled in open session, because doing so burned every remaining pretense of mutual restraint. Across the secure channel in her ear, Earth Command fed her confirmations in clipped bursts. 2 human research teams still missing from joint facilities. 4. The Thessaly strike groups repositioned near commerce lanes and repeated interference with civilian relay traffic around Kipri. The underlying pattern was no longer nuanced. Delegitimize first. Isolate second. Seize under administrative language. When the speaker recognized the Terran delegation, Hayes rose and crossed into the central light. She did not bring guards. She did not raise her voice. The restraint was deliberate because panic would have validated the sorry framing, while anger would have given Sam his preferred theater. Council delegates, the Thesari presentation is technically sophisticated and strategically dishonest, she said. The recursive architecture they describe is real. Their interpretation is not. In human cognition, threat response, long memory, and moral valuation are coupled by design. That coupling does not produce paralysis. It produces constraint. We do not fire because we can. We fire when memory and duty align, and when alternatives are exhausted. That is not instability. It is the control system that has kept our border wars limited for 2 centuries. She turned toward Sam, and the chamber translation matrix rendered each word with cutting clarity. Humanity issues the following formal notice. Cease all neural interference programs targeting human personnel. Withdraw the Thesari strike groups from human lanes. Release detained human researchers and certify their condition through neutral observers. You have 1 standard day. Sam laughed, a short metallic rasp amplified through his harness. Pray rhetoric in ceremonial diction, he said. You clutch your emotional noise and call it architecture. Our synaptic lance arrays erase such loops in minutes. Surrender defensive command to Thesari oversight, or be pacified by force. The silence after his ultimatum was deeper than outrage. It was calculation. Hayes inclined her head once to the speaker, then stepped back to her station without comment. Her pulse stayed steady. Her jaw did not. In the secure delegation suite 3 corridors away, the human team assembled under muted red privacy lights while counter-surveillance software swept for hidden emissions. Admiral Elena Volkov stood at the far wall on full-scale holoprojection from Fleet Command. Gray-streaked hair clipped close, uniform plain except for command bars and an old rescue pin she had never removed. She watched the replay of Sam's statement without visible reaction, then looked directly at Hayes. He crossed every line in one broadcast, Volkov said. No ambiguity left for neutral states to hide behind. Hayes set her tablet on the table and finally let one breath out. He wanted that. If he can brand us neurologically unfit, intervention sounds hygienic instead of imperial. At the table's opposite end, Dr. Sophia Novak, Chief of Cognitive Defense at Strategic Systems, pulled up the Thesari scan layers and highlighted the recursive path Sam had mocked. They are not wrong about the loop, she said. They are wrong about what the loop does under pressure. It recruits memory and moral weighting into threat processing, so local actors preserve mission intent without awaiting central permission. If command nets fail, behavior does not fragment into panic. It devolves into principles. Volkov's eyes narrowed with professional interest rather than surprise. You are saying disrupted fleets can still think in alignment. I am saying our people were trained around that fact for 30 years, Novak replied. Compartmentalized analog protocols, autonomous cell authority, fallback doctrine where contested civilians outrank tactical speed unless extinction thresholds are crossed. We coded it into drills because the sorry neural warfare was never hypothetical. Hayes looked from scientist to admiral and understood again why Earth had sent this specific team. She was the public voice. Volkov was the shield. Novak was the map of where human restraint ended and sanctioned force began. Within 40 minutes of the session, encrypted dispatches reached every human border command with legal and military annexes attached. Captain James Mitchell received his copy on the bridge of the destroyer Quiet Resolve while orbiting Capri Relay. The order was starkly simple. Hold lanes open for civilian evacuation, avoid first strike, assume synaptic disruption on initial contact, execute distributed command package Delta if fleet mesh degraded. Mitchell read it once, then once more, and passed verbal confirmation to each section chief by name. His crew answered in the same cadence they had practiced for years, not because they expected calm skies, but because habit mattered when signal integrity did not. At Earth Defense Secretariat, Minister Olivia Barrett signed emergency authorization for reserve mobilization and sent the final diplomatic protest through 7 neutral embassies in parallel, ensuring the sorry denial would fail in public record. In Luna Dry Dock, technicians rolled armored covers off older rail platforms that official budgets had labeled obsolete. In a subterranean archive beneath Reykjavik Command, historians and predictive analysts unsealed battle libraries spanning colony uprisings, pirate wars, and near failures no one celebrated but everyone had studied. Human strength had never depended on one flagship, one doctrine, or one perfect network. It depended on layered memory and a political culture that treated preparation as boring until the day it became salvation. Hayes watched those feeds in compressed windows while drafting her final note to the council registry. She chose language without ornament. The sorry ultimatum received. Human warning delivered. Compliance timer active. Independent monitors requested. Volkov's projection remained beside her, hands behind her back. If they pull back, we stop at verification, the Admiral said. If they advance, we answer fast and proportionate. No reprisals against civilian infrastructure. No species-level punishment. Dismantle the war machine, not the species, Hayes said. Volkov nodded once. Exactly. A junior analyst entered with fresh intercepts and passed a slate to Novak, who scanned, exhaled, and lifted her gaze. The Sari strike groups are accelerating toward Kepri and the outer relay chain. They are broadcasting compliance demands to civilian traffic. Hayes closed the registry file and stood. The crux had arrived without ceremony. A power that believed conscience was weakness had chosen to test that belief against a civilization built around memory, restraint, and thresholds it did not advertise twice. Then the day starts now, she said. No one in the room mistook her calm for uncertainty. The first confirmation arrived as a civilian scream compressed by bad bandwidth. It cut through 3 secure channels at once, then stabilized into the bridge audio feed from the merchant hauler Saffron Gate, outbound from Kepri with 87 passengers and a hold full of medical catalysts bound for the Valerie enclaves. Captain Mitchell listened without interrupting while the hauler's master fought to keep her voice level. Unknown warships are matching vector and painting us with lock-grid telemetry. They are ordering us to divert to the Sari inspection coordinates. We filed neutral transit 40 minutes ago. They are overriding traffic control and forcing lane collapse. Request escort. Request lawful corridor enforcement. Mitchell's tactical officer had already pushed the sensor packet onto the main display. The ships were not unknown. 3 Thesari cutters and a command frigate sat across the lane like a steel gate. Whole signatures openly military. Transponders declaring protective cognitive compliance patrol. One of the cutters had deployed docking harpoons against a second civilian vessel that had tried to turn away. Under council law, even wartime interdiction required declared hostilities and review. The Sari command had skipped both. Mitchell opened a direct line to local Thesari control and kept his tone measured enough for legal archive. This is Captain James Mitchell, Destroyer Quiet Resolve Terran Compact Navy, assigned lane protection at Kepri Relay under Standing Council Charter. You are conducting an unlawful seizure of civilian traffic. Disengage boarding operations and clear the transit channel immediately. The answer came from a throatier translator profile than Sam's, likely a line commander proud to be seen following doctrine. Human vessel, your cognition profile has been designated a strategic contamination risk under Thesari Emergency Authority. Civilian traffic entering your zone is subject to protective quarantine. Withdraw to outer marker and await supervised disarmament. Non-compliance will be interpreted as predatory instability. Mitchell did not look away from the tactical plot. Your authority is contested, your seizure is illegal, and your record now contains this warning. Release those ships. The Thesari commander did not bother with rhetoric. A second harpoon fired. On another screen, magnetic clamps sealed against the civilian hull. In the council chamber, Catherine Hayes received the same live feed seconds later through a priority relay she had not expected to use this soon. She stepped back into the white-gold central light before formal summons, forcing every delegate screen to split between her and the seizure at Kipri. That procedural breach would be challenged in ordinary times. These were not ordinary times. Speaker. Delegates. The Thesari forces are now boarding registered civilian vessels in a neutral lane while compliance timer remains active, she said. I am filing immediate emergency motion for injunction and observer dispatch. High Commander Sam is present. Let him answer on record whether this is his order. Sam rose slowly, as if granting the chamber a courtesy it had not earned. It is, he said. Your lanes have become vectors of cognitive hazard. We are stabilizing them. You were given a path to supervised peace and chose defiance. Protective custody begins now. Hayes held his gaze. Then, hear the final warning in full legal form. The Thesari Command has violated transit law, breached personal sovereignty through coercive neurocartography, and initiated armed interdiction against civilians. Withdraw all units from Kipri and adjacent human lanes within 1 hour. Release every detainee, including the 2 missing research teams, with neutral medical verification. If you continue, humanity will use force to remove you. Sam's mandibles flexed in what the Thesari culture treated as a smile and everyone else read as contempt. His answer rolled through the chamber with ceremonial cruelty. For generations, lesser species have begged us to police the edges of civilized space, and now the noisiest child insists on legal niceties while its own cognition loops in fear and sentiment. You mistake our restraint for uncertainty. We have broken hive swarms, machine coalitions, and fanatic crusades. Your people are neither coherent nor disciplined enough to survive first impact. Continue this performance if it comforts you. In 1 day, your fleets will either kneel under supervision or drift silent while cleaner minds restore order. He cut his own channel before the speaker could censure him. Hayes did not move for a beat, then turned to the chamber rather than to him. Council record will show that the Thesari Command refused lawful withdrawal and threatened species-level coercion in open session. Human defensive response is now active under Charter Article 17, Clause 4, Preservation of Civilian Life and Sovereign Command Integrity. On her secure line, Volkov spoke with the calm of someone reading weather over an ocean she already knew. Authorization is green across all fleets. You are clear. Hayes answered without lowering her eyes from the delegates. Proceed. 19 minutes later, the compliance timer expired with the Thesari Marines still cutting through the Saffron Gate's cargo lock. At Capri, the first engagement looked exactly like Thesari doctrine said it would. Synaptic lance arrays ignited from the command frigate in narrow violet fans that washed across human formations and slammed into every active mesh node. On quiet resolve, half the tactical screens blinked white and rebooted into cascading errors. 2 escort destroyers veered off vector as helm crews fought sudden disorientation and crossfeed lag. The Thesari cutters surged through the gap, hull plating bright with boarding beacons, and broadcast surrender demands across civilian channels to maximize humiliation. Subcommander Tarek Voss of the Thesari frigate, sable ascent, watched the telemetry with mounting satisfaction. He had studied Terran after-action reports for weeks and had concluded what his superiors had concluded. Humans were brave in close quarters, inventive in logistics, dangerously sentimental with civilians, and structurally weak once command cohesion broke. As the land cycle completed, his threat board filled with what he expected to see. Fragmented Terran signatures, stalled response times, short command bursts tagged with conflicting authorities. "Observe," he told his bridge officers. "Their decision web has collapsed. Boarding cadres will claim the relay in under 6 minutes." His sensor chief clicked assent. 2 human destroyers are attempting manual maneuver. Vector discipline degraded. Recommend immediate crippling fire. "Negative," Voss said. "Damage optics first, drive second. High Commander Sam requested visible pacification." He opened a fleet-wide channel and delivered a polished statement for later playback. "Human vessels at Capri, your unstable command architecture has failed exactly as predicted. Stand down and submit to cognitive supervision. Resist, and you will be rendered non-functional." On quiet resolve, Captain Mitchell stood with one hand on the analog repeater, bolted under his DAD digital plot, an old brass-rimmed instrument many visiting officers had once mistaken for ceremonial nostalgia. Around him, bridge crew shifted by practiced sequence rather than panic. Mesh channels were compromised, so they dropped to hardline intercom. Fire control desynced, so gunnery switched to local optical tracking. Fleet command packets stalled, so Delta Doctrine unfolded cell by cell. "Delta package active," Mitchell said. "Compartment leaders, execute by principal tree. Priority 1, civilian egress. Priority 2, deny hostile boarding. Priority 3, preserve relay core." Acknowledgements came back as voice, not text. "Engineering copies. Port batteries copy. Marine section copies." The words were plain and steady. It was enough. Lieutenant Anna Becker in electronic warfare had been waiting for this exact failure mode since cadet year. She fed captured Lance telemetry into the resonance emulator Dr. Novak's team had rushed from Reykjavik and pushed a low-power ghost pattern into local space, just enough to brush the sorry threat filters without revealing source. On her display, one cutter wavered, then painted its sister ship with a transient hostile tag before auto-correction cleared it. "First ghost bite," she said. They flinched. Mitchell nodded once. "Do not overplay. Keep it ambiguous." Outside the viewport, the battle tightened into brutal geometry. The Thesari Marines reached the Saffron Gate's lock, but a human corvette without functioning mesh rolled between them and the hauler, took 2 lance strikes on armor, and dumped counterboarding teams through emergency hard tubes. Another human destroyer, apparently drifting, vented decoy chaff and rotated just enough to expose rail turrets on a blind angle the Thesari had left open while concentrating on command nodes. 3 rail slugs crossed the distance in silence and sheared weapon mounts off the lead cutter without breaching habitat sections. The cutter spun, alive but disarmed. Voss stared at the feed, annoyance replacing certainty. How are they coordinating fire with mesh collapse? His sensor chief hesitated. "Unknown. Signal analysis shows intermittent line-of-sight lasers, hardline burst relays, and non-networked local control loops." "Primitive," Voss said, then saw the second anomaly and stopped pretending it did not matter. 2 Thesari cutters had acquired each other as short-cycle threats again, only for fractions of a second, but long enough to force evasive movement that opened lanes for human evacuation tugs slipping past with civilian pods. the pattern repeated at irregular intervals, never strong enough to expose a spoof source, always timed to moments of Thesari overcommitment. This was not panic. This was adaptation. He switched to a tight beam for command and received nothing but static hiss. Human jamming had not overwhelmed the spectrum. It had narrowed it, pinching his preferred channels until emergency bands carried traffic in the open. On those channels, he could hear his own junior officers arguing over phantom contacts they could not replicate. "Sub-Commander," his weapons officer said. "Boarding cadres on civilian hull are pinned. Human Marines are using compartment locks to segment approach corridors. They are not contesting every deck, only junctions feeding life support and bridge access. Casualties moderate. Progress slow." Voss understood the insult then. The humans were not trying to win quickly. They were denying him the clean victory narrative Sam required. On quiet resolve, Mitchell received a burst from Volkov's task force, brief and stripped of flourish. "Hold Capri. Preserve civilians. Reinforcements en route. Begin phase lantern when local conditions permit." Lantern. The word passed through him like current. Phase lantern meant the first controlled inversion of captured lance behavior at scale, not yet full lattice synchronization, just enough to prove Thesari neural dominance could be bent back on itself. He keyed shipwide. "All sections, this is the captain. You are doing exactly what you were trained to do. Maintain compartment doctrine, keep corridors open. We are not breaking here." A Marine sergeant answered over a channel still cluttered with interference and distant impacts. "Copy, Captain. They keep charging the same choke point. We keep closing the same door." For 28 grinding minutes, the fight at Kepri remained uncertain on every public feed. Human ships burned and limped. The Thesari formations pressed hard, and the relay itself took repeated strikes that scorched its outer ring. Yet civilian traffic kept escaping in staggered bursts, and every time Thesari units massed for a decisive thrust, some sensor ghost or local rail ambush forced them to split. From the council chamber, delegates watched in rigid silence as the tactical map refused to follow Thesari predictions. The Kith avians unfolded their wings inch by inch. The merchants of Pax stopped whispering and simply recorded. Hayes stood beside the speaker's dais, receiving battlefield updates in one ear, while Thesari legal counsel demanded sanctions against human, disruptive resistance in the other. She gave counsel no reply. Her eyes stayed on the map, where tiny green icons, civilian transponders, kept slipping out through lanes Sam had declared sealed. When Volkov's channel opened again, her voice was iron wrapped in ice. "Kepri will not hold forever. That was never the requirement. Mitchell has preserved the corridor, bloodied their spearhead, and forced their doctrine into daylight. Sam wanted a demonstration. He has one." Hayes answered. "Do we escalate?" "We respond," Volkov said. "Across the line. Controlled. Irreversible." Around Kipri, human ships that had seemed crippled began rotating into new vectors with deliberate slowness, as if an invisible metronome had started somewhere the Thesari could not hear. The first beat landed in engineering, not on the bridge. When the mesh died, Chief Engineer Pavel Sokolov had 30 seconds of contradictory alarms, no clean command uplink, and a reactor control board that assumed digital arbitration he no longer trusted. He listened once to Mitchell's principal tree over hardline, took a marker and wrote 3 words across the manual. Slate bolted beside his station. Civilians, corridor, ship. Then he started cutting automations out of the loop, one breaker at a time. Power dropped from non-essential decks and flooded into point defense and emergency life support. Gravity fell to 3/4 standard in boarding corridors, so Marines could move faster, and Thesari heavy armor would lose balance at thresholds. Fire suppression shifted to local authority, allowing human teams to vent smoke into selected junctions, while preserving habitable air where civilian survivors might be sheltering. None of it required central synchronization. It required memory, triage, and judgment under fear. It was exactly what the Sari doctrine had declared human cognition could not do. On the bridge, Mitchell watched his dead tactical net and built a battle picture from fragments. Line-of-sight laser flashes, marine helmet pings, visual marks from damaged optics, and one analog repeater that clicked with old mechanical certainty whenever a friendly transponder crossed a calibrated arc. The map looked crude compared to fleet mesh overlays. It also could not be blinded by one elegant weapon. "Port battery, mark Cutter 3 by hull flare only," he said. "Confirmed by visual and thermal, Captain. Do not strike propulsion. Strip its boarding rails." The gunnery officer did not ask why. She had heard the principal tree. Disarm first, preserve pressure corridors, keep evacuation viable. Quiet Resolve rolled on manual thrusters, just enough to clear a drifting cargo spine, and fired 3 controlled rail shots. 2 missed. 1 connected cleanly, shearing the cutter's external assault rig into spinning debris, while leaving the hull intact. Across the lane, a human escort frigate, with half its bow sensors burned out, executed a maneuver no simulation had scored highly, because no simulation had paired it with human stubbornness. It rammed a disabled relay truss with sacrificial plating, rebounded into a new vector, and used the collision to sling itself between the Saffron Gate and incoming Thessari borders. The captain never asked permission. Her local command cell had seen civilians trapped and a corridor closing. They acted. That was the first surprise the Sari analysts could not file away as luck. Isolated human units were not random. They were convergent. Subcommander Voss saw it arrive as a pattern in his own frustration. Each time he cut one human node off the field, that node became tactically simpler and strategically clearer. A destroyer without mesh did not freeze. It narrowed mission scope and executed with disturbing consistency. Marine teams cut through Thessari thrusts not by heroic charges but by barricading exactly the junctions that preserved life support and bridge access. Damage control crews rerouted atmosphere to trapped compartments before reporting to command, and command accepted the delay as doctrinal compliance rather than insubordination. His sensor chief, who had spent years quantifying enemy indecision, sounded unsteady for the first time. Their threat responses are spiking, but action latency is dropping. That should not coexist. Voss snapped, more sharply than he intended. Define should. Fear markers should increase command dependency. Instead, it appears to be increasing local doctrinal retrieval. They are pulling archived procedure sets faster under stress. Their behavior is becoming more rule-bound, not less. Voss stared at the human formation where no formation ought to be. Ships with failed links still moved as if reading from one silent page. He had mocked Terran memory culture in briefing halls, all those commemorations and historical drills and ritualized after-action recitations. Now his consoles showed fear-driving recall, recall driving value selection, and value selection driving coherent violence. The loop Sam had called paralysis was generating disciplined improvisation at combat tempo. On the council feed, Sofia Novak watched the same telemetry from a secure analysis node beneath Reykjavik and allowed herself one brief exhale. The model held. Human operators under neural assault were not becoming reckless. They were compressing. Threat input hit autonomic fear networks, fear-triggered memory indexing, and memory did not merely retrieve tactics, it retrieved constraints. Who to shield first? What not to destroy? Which risks were acceptable? It was cognition with brakes welded to engine output. She patched Volkov directly. Admiral, Capri confirms real-time loop performance across at least 11 isolated cells. They are not waiting for central correction. They are self-stabilizing. Volkov did not smile. Can we prove it beyond this battle? We already are. The Sari Lance pressure is acting like a stress test. Then, keep the test running just long enough to teach them, Volkov said. Not long enough to lose people. At Kepri, Mitchell received the next hardline report from Marine Sergeant Idris Walsh, voice rough with static and smoke. Boarding Team Blue holds Lockway C and D. The Surrey keep forcing center corridor with shield wedges. We keep redirecting through maintenance trunks. Civilian crew from Saffron Gate moved to Coolant Annex. 32 confirmed, no criticals. Mitchell keyed back. You did not hold deck by deck? Negative, Captain. Just the decks that mattered. Exactly right. Keep doing less, better. The grim humor came 30 seconds later from a different channel, a gunnery petty officer who had lost half her display and found religion in manual optics. For a species we were told cannot choose quickly, sir, they are very committed to making bad decisions at this exact airlock. Mitchell almost laughed, then returned to the plot. Mark that airlock for repeat discouragement. Outside, the Surrey cutters attempted to reset into textbook spear geometry. Each attempt ran into small human decisions that compounded into a tactical dragnet. A shuttle tug, stripped to emergency power, towed 3 civilian pods through a debris seam no strategist would have noticed on a clean map. 2 human corvettes, unable to receive synchronized firing solutions, settled into alternating cadence by visual cue and struck boarding craft every time they exposed dorsal clamps. Quiet resolve took another lance wash that killed remaining forward mesh nodes, then shifted to signal lamps and directional laser bursts, old maritime methods translated to vacuum war. The tide did not flip in spectacle. It tilted in percentages. Civilian egress rose from uncertain to steady. The Sari boarding progress fell from rapid to contested. Human losses remained real, but panic never materialized, and collapse never came. In the council chamber, Catherine Hayes stood with both hands resting lightly on the console rail, while delegates watched Kipri refuse the script written for it. A Valeri observer, voice kept low out of procedural respect, spoke toward her station without requesting floor rights. Ambassador, your ships are fighting as if each one remembers being all of them. Hayes kept her eyes on the feed where another green transponder cleared the kill zone. That is close enough to accurate. 3 rows above, a former Thesari client delegate finally stopped pretending neutrality and sent a visible public annotation to the chamber archive. Terran command integrity remains functional under neural assault. Thesari claim of inherent human strategic instability not supported by live evidence. It was a small, bureaucratic sentence. It landed like artillery. Voss felt the political shift before he saw it. His command channel, still pinched onto emergency bands, filled with clipped corrections from Thesari legal staff demanding better optics language, fewer open band surrender threats, and immediate footage of human disorder indicators. He muted them and turned to the war in front of him. His officers were no longer asking whether humans could be pacified quickly. They were asking how long their own cutters could maintain pressure before ammunition and marine stamina degraded below assault threshold. The second shock hit when one of his junior commanders requested discretionary withdrawal from a junction he had been ordered to seize at all costs. The request was phrased in formal honor code, but it was still a withdrawal request. Voss granted it because losing that crew to prove a slogan would not reopen the lane. He realized, with cold clarity, that he had just acted like a Terran principal cell. By the time the first hour closed, Kepri remained a battleground, not a rout. The Sari units still held portions of the relay perimeter, and their heavier frigate guns could still punish any human ship that overextended. Yet the strategic demonstration Sam had promised had inverted in front of witnesses. Neural dominance had not produced human submission. It had revealed a form of decentralized discipline. The Sauri doctrine had never modeled because the Sauri cognition had never needed it. Their empire prized synchronized command certainty, swift obedience, and contempt for moral hesitation. Against most enemies, that triad was decisive. Against humans, it was becoming brittle. Voss opened a restricted channel to Sam's flagship and sent his report with no ornamental language. Capri engagement continues. Human mesh disruption successful in initial phase, but expected cognitive collapse did not occur. Enemy local cells maintain mission coherence under fear stress. Boarding progress slowed by adaptive compartment doctrine. Civilian evacuation not fully denied. Recommend immediate doctrinal revision and reinforcement before further political transmission. The reply came from Sam directly, not through staff, which meant anger had already outrun process. "You are describing prey improvisation as if it were parody," Sam said. "Hold position. Intensify lance cycles. Break their local command cadres and broadcast their failure. The Council requires an example, not excuses." Voss kept his tone level through effort. "High Commander, repeated lance cycles appear to increase Terran procedural convergence. Additional exposure may be reinforcing the behavior we seek to shatter." A silence followed, taut and dangerous. When Sam answered, his contempt had sharpened into something harder, almost defensive. "Then you will apply violence faster than they can remember. The Sauri victory has never depended on enemy comprehension." The channel cut. Voss stood very still while his bridge pretended not to watch him. He had served the Dominion for 21 campaign years, had believed discipline meant suppressing doubt until results restored certainty. Now doubt was not private weakness. It was data. His censor chief broke protocol first. "Subcommander, with respect, our own pilots are beginning to overclassify phantom threats when Terran ghosts pulse. We can compensate, but not while maintaining aggressive spear spacing." His weapons officer added, more carefully, "If we widen intervals and rotate Marines for recovery, we can hold current gains and reduce friendly misidentification risk. It will look less decisive on public feeds." There it was, the internal conflict made operational. Preserve image or preserve force. Voss chose force. Widen intervals, rotate cadres, shift to containment posture around the relay ring. We deny expansion and rebuild coherence. High Commander ordered intensification, the communications lieutenant said quietly. "Record this as local necessity under degraded signal conditions," Voss replied. "I will take responsibility." Within the next 11 minutes, the Sauri formations around Capri began to pull back by measured increments, not retreating, not surrendering, but abandoning the clean spearhead shape that had defined their superiority myth for generations. Human crews noticed immediately. Mitchell did not chase. He used the breathing room to push 2 more evacuation waves through the corridor and rotate his own exhausted Marines off the hottest locks. "Captain," Lieutenant Becker said, eyes fixed on her jagged signal board, "they are regrouping for a second doctrine pass." Mitchell nodded. "So are we." On Sam's flagship, the regrouping telemetry lit his tactical theater in sullen amber lines. He watched spear formations flatten into containment arcs and felt, for the first time in this campaign, the pressure of an audience he could not command. The Council had seen enough to question. Client states had seen enough to hedge. Human diplomats would weaponize every cautious maneuver as proof of the Sauri overreach. He summoned his senior war analysts and did not invite legal counsel. "Explain this without cowardice," he said. An elder strategist, scales-scarred from old boarding wars, stepped forward and chose honesty with visible reluctance. "High Commander, Terran neural architecture appears to convert disruption into local doctrinal activation. Their fear response is linked to historical retrieval and ethical prioritization. They are not hesitating. They are selecting constraints rapidly and acting inside them. Our lances remove network coherence, but Terran command culture was built to survive that state." Sam's jaw tightened. "You are repeating Terran propaganda in my command deck." "I am describing a battlefield result," the strategist said. "If we continue treating their loop as weakness, we will continue feeding it." Around the chamber, no one moved. To challenge a high commander in open tactical council bordered on career suicide. To refuse empirical telemetry bordered on species suicide. The tension sat between those truths like live ordnance. Sam finally turned back to the display. Human ships, scarred and outgunned, held a corridor he had promised to erase. Thessari forces, still stronger on paper, were repositioning to recover coherence under an enemy he had called cognitively primitive. "Very well," he said, each word clipped. "Capri becomes containment, not conclusion. We regroup, recalibrate Lance Doctrine, and force decisive engagement on ground we choose. Signal all strike groups. No further public declarations until I issue them." His officers bowed, relief hidden behind ritual. As orders rippled outward, the battle around Capri settled into a hard, temporary equilibrium. Human crews patched holes, counted survivors, and reset firing arcs by hand. Thessari commanders tightened discipline, revalidated transponders, and rewrote assumptions they had considered biological fact that morning. No side mistook the pause for peace. It was an intermission between theories. In the council chamber, Hayes received Volkov's latest update and allowed herself exactly one private concession to fatigue before her posture reset. "Capri stands," she told the speaker for the official record. "Civilian corridor remains open. The Thessari forces have shifted to regrouping posture." Across the chamber, several delegations that had avoided eye contact for hours looked directly at her now, not with gratitude yet, and not with trust, but with recalculation that bordered on respect. Far beyond the chamber lights, under damaged stars and drifting metal, both fleets prepared for what came next, and the Thessari prepared it with something they had not brought to the first assault: unwanted caution. Unwanted caution lasted exactly 6 minutes on the Thessari command net before human signal warfare made caution itself expensive. Lieutenant Anna Becker sat forward in her cradle on quiet resolve, jaw tight, fingertips moving across a board that looked more like instrumentation from a museum than a modern warship. The digital overlays were still unstable from lance damage, so she worked from raw harmonics and probability bands, feeding them into the resonance emulator Reykjavik had pushed to the fleet under Phase Lantern authority. Around her, bridge crew spoke in low, clipped confirmations while Captain Mitchell held formation over the relay corridor and refused every impulse to chase the repositioning cutters. "Captain," Becker said, "they have revalidated transponder discipline and widened spacing. They learned from the first cycle." Mitchell kept his eyes on the viewport where wounded ships drifted under tug control. "Then, we give them a second lesson." At Reykjavik Command, Dr. Sophia Novak listened to 4 battlefronts at once and watched one equation begin to stabilize across all of them: captured Lance telemetry, when inverted and phase shifted through local debris fields, did not merely create false contacts. It created emotionally persuasive false contacts, brief sensor echoes shaped to the exact threat profiles the Thessari crews were trained to prioritize. The decoys did not need to fool analysts for long. They only needed to force one defensive movement at the wrong instant. Lantern threshold reached, Novak told Admiral Volkov over secure command. Recommend distributed deployment, not concentrated. If we flood them, they adapt. If we pulse them through local context, they misclassify. Volkov's reply came without hesitation. Authorize all task groups. Keep civilian lanes marked green. No strike packages through sanctuary bands. Novak glanced to the tactical historian at her left, who had been indexing the Serare formation habits by honor caste lineage. And activate Moonglass channel, she added. I want the occupied moon corridors open now. The historian nodded once and transmitted the packet. At Kepri, the second demonstration began as a whisper inside enemy certainty. A Thesari cutter tracking a human corvette registered a hostile return from its own flank and rolled shielding toward the Ghost. Its sister ship interpreted that shield roll as targeting prelude and answered with a warning lock. No shots fired, but both vessels broke spear timing for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough for 2 human rescue skiffs to burn through a debris seam and clear 70 civilian evacuees toward the relay's far side. On the Sable Ascend, Subcommander Voss watched his tactical board bloom with short-lived threat blossoms that vanished before full verification. He had prepared for this after Kepri. He had drilled his bridge to ignore transient contacts below confirmation threshold. Yet the decoys were now arriving paired with real human movement, each phantom synchronized to a genuine tactical risk. Ignore everything, and he walked into ambush. Trust everything, and he fractured his own line. Record pattern, Delta, he ordered. Terrans are coupling electronic deception to humanitarian extraction vectors. They are not seeking attritional kills. They are opening precise lanes. His communications lieutenant spoke softly, as if volume might turn data back into doctrine. Subcommander. Command from Sam prioritizes visual dominance on public feeds. He demands we close all corridors, no exceptions. Voss stared at the map, where corridor closures now required guessing correctly every 15 seconds, while humans kept choosing the one gap he could not cover without exposing another. Inform High Commander we are closing what can be closed, he said. Then continue reality. By the end of the second combat hour, Moonglass packets had reached 3 human task groups and 2 allied militias that had stayed formally neutral until civilian evacuations began. The packets contained telemetry keys, resonance timing windows, and strict legal annexes defining permitted force. In less disciplined hands, that framework would have looked restrictive. In human hands, it became velocity with boundaries. The occupied moons were named Talaris and Vane, both minor industrial satellites with mixed populations and temporary Thesari garrisons established during the opening seizure. Velari dock workers, Pax freight clerks, and human technical advisors had been confined there under protective compliance review. Thesari Command had expected the hostages to deter escalation. Instead, they became the center of human escalation. Commander Richard Sullivan led the first boarding wave toward Talaris under a hull-painted instruction that every Marine aboard had memorized before launch. Secure life support. Secure transit control. Avoid reactor sectors unless fired upon. The Thesari troops in the outer ring met them with disciplined resistance, but human assault teams moved past fixed choke points they did not need and cut into maintenance spines that linked detention blocks to evacuation pads. Team 3, hold your lane, Sullivan said over local comm. We are not collecting trophies. We are collecting people. A Thesari junior officer broadcast surrender demands in rigid ceremonial cadence, calling the humans disorderly scavengers and warning that continued advance would justify terminal pacification. Sullivan answered with bureaucratic calm while breaching another bulkhead. This facility is under unlawful occupation. You are ordered to stand down, mark all detainee locations, and move your wounded to corridor markers. Non-compliance will be met with disarmament. Compliance will be met with medical aid. On Vane, the operation went worse for 12 minutes and then better all at once. The Sari defenders had mined 2 transit shafts and forced the human entry teams onto exposed gantries. Lieutenant Elena Petrov, leading a mixed unit of Navy security and volunteer engineers, saw the trap, halted the push, and sent 3 of her people crawling through thermal conduits no combat simulator recommended because combat simulators did not reward patience under fire. They emerged behind a control blister, severed detonator links, and opened an emergency tram line straight into the civilian quarter. When the first tram arrived at the extraction pad, Valari families stepped out carrying packed tools rather than luggage, eyes wide, movements fast and orderly. One older Valari scholar paused long enough to touch the armored wrist of the nearest human marine in formal thanks, then kept moving, because everyone understood gratitude could wait until orbit. The galaxy watched those feeds because human command made sure it could. Hayes had forced observer channels open through the Council archive, and now delegates saw a war that looked strategically sharp and morally constrained. Human ships disarmed boarding craft and left habitats intact. Human marines sealed off ammunition vaults but reopened clinic wings. The Sari conscripts who dropped weapons were zip-cuffed, scanned, and moved to med bays instead of execution pits. The moral contrast stopped being argument and became footage. In the chamber, High Commander Sam remained publicly silent. A Thesari legal attaché requested floor priority by procedural right and submitted an official Dominion communique through Military Council. The address ran long, polished, and furious. For cycles beyond your species' memory, the Sari Order has held this region against chaos while lesser polities traded sentiment for security. Observe what the Terrans now celebrate: sabotage, infiltration, and algorithmic deceit aimed at disciplined fleets performing lawful stabilization. They corrupt sensor trust, weaponize civilian movement, and call their predation mercy. If this council allows such conduct to stand, every border degenerates into manipulative theater where emotional species hide violence behind hostage optics. We will not permit that decay. The Sari Command will restore coherent authority, and those who assist Terran disorder will be treated as co-belligerents. The attaché ended the transmission to a chamber that did not clap. Hayes rose only when recognized, her voice cool enough to cut through the chamber noise. The Council has now witnessed the Sari seizure of neutral transit, coercive neural interference, unlawful detention, and repeated attempts to close evacuation corridors by force. It has also witnessed the human response in full view: targeted disarmament, civilian extraction, medical stabilization for enemy wounded, and documented compliance with charter law in active combat. The Sari doctrine cannot explain this because it confuses cruelty with strength. Humanity fights for command integrity because without it, every treaty is theater. Humanity fights for civilians because without them, victory is administration over ruins. And humanity fights with restraint because power without restraint becomes the threat it claims to contain. The merchants of Pax transmitted public support 30 seconds later. The Keth followed with a narrower statement endorsing neutral medical access to all occupied zones under human escort. Former Thesari clients began quietly reflagging supply ships away from Dominion convoys. 90 minutes after Moonglass activation, Volkov called a fleet-wide channel, and every human captain patched it to local speakers, from scarred destroyers at Kepri to transport crews loading frightened families above Vane. For 200 years, we were patient, she said. We signed charters, opened lanes, and answered insult with procedure because procedure prevents wars no one can afford. We hoped the Thesari would choose restraint when restraint cost them nothing. They chose invasion when they thought conscience meant weakness. Hear your orders clearly. We will break their capacity to wage this war. We will not become what they are. Protect civilians first. Disarm where possible. Strike decisively when required. Remember why we are here, and remember each other. On quiet resolve, the bridge stayed silent for a beat after the channel closed. Then, Mitchell said, almost conversationally, "You heard the Admiral. We are apparently still expected to be professionals." Becker let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Disappointing for everyone who predicted emotional collapse, Captain." The next phase moved fast because human command had spent years building doctrine for broken networks and political scrutiny at the same time. Task groups rotated through Kipri in staggered cells, each one carrying partial data and full legal authority to act within principal trees. Cyber neuro teams pulsed resonance decoys through rec fields and relay shadows, never repeating the same cadence twice. Long-range rail platforms that the Sari planners had labeled obsolete began carving weapons arrays off carrier escorts with unnerving precision. Voss requested reinforcement twice and received one answer: hold until decisive operation at Neuralis Junction. Sam had shifted strategic priority from Kepri containment to annihilation staging at the junction, where 3 hyperlanes crossed and fleet mass could be converted into spectacle. Voss understood the political logic and hated the military timing. Every hour spent holding Kepri under lantern pressure burned Thessari confidence while humans sharpened method. His sensor chief leaned close, voice tight. "Sub-Commander, we are no longer losing because their tonnage exceeds ours. We are losing initiative because they keep forcing us to defend assumptions." Voss looked at the board where another human extraction wing slipped through a gap opened by 2 phantom threats and 1 real rail strike. "Then stop defending assumptions," he said. "Defend ships, defend crews. Let Sam have his spectacle elsewhere." At Earth Defense Secretariat, Minister Olivia Barrett signed the mobilization supplement that moved reserve fleets from classified anchorages into declared combat theaters. She did it without speech-making, then walked into the press room and announced only what needed saying. Human territory would be held, Allied populations under threat would be protected, and all operations would remain under Council law even if the Sari command had abandoned it. The statement landed across dozens of worlds where leaders had spent 2 days waiting to see whether humans would rage or fold. They saw neither. They saw a species escalating by doctrine. At Kipri, the tipping point came when Quiet Resolve and 2 fresh escorts executed a synchronized feint that drew 3 Thessari cutters into overlapping decoy bands. For 19 seconds, the cutters treated one another as primary threats and spread their shields inward. Mitchell had been waiting for that exact geometry. "Rail groups, bracket external lances only," he ordered. "No hull penetrations." 3 impacts later, the cutters drifted weaponless, but alive. Human tugs moved in, not to board, but to tow them out of the civilian lane. Across the perimeter, similar micro-victories stacked into strategic shape. The Sari boarding attempts dropped. Human corridor integrity rose. Evacuation totals passed all initial estimates. Talaris and Vane were no longer occupied zones. They were cleared and under joint humanitarian control with human perimeter defense. In the Council archive, analysts from neutral worlds began using a phrase none of them had applied to humanity before this war: strategic anchor. Sam saw that phrase in 3 intelligence briefs and smashed none of them, which frightened his staff more than anger would have. Rage was familiar. Calculation under humiliation was where he was most dangerous. He convened his carrier admirals in a sealed war room and projected the Neuralis Junction in hard crimson lines. "We end this in 1 strike," he said. "No containment, no demonstrations, no legal theatrics. We mass at Neuralis, break their command spine, and force unconditional submission before the Council can formalize this farce into precedent. One admiral asked what to do about lantern interference. Sam's mandibles set. "Overwhelm it with Scalmar," he said. "Their tricks require precision. Precision dies under saturation." On the human side, Volkov received the intercepted deployment order less than 4 minutes after it left Sam's secure relay, thanks to the same emergency channel in discipline that had spread through Thesari formation since Kipri. She read it once, then opened a command conference with Hayes, Novak, Mitchell, and Barrett. "The final confrontation is no longer theoretical," she said. "Sam is concentrating heavy war carriers at Neuralis Junction for annihilation doctrine. He believes mass can erase adaptation." Novak answered first. "Mass makes pattern. Pattern can be shaped." Hayes folded her hands, eyes steady. "Then we make the choice explicit on record. We issue one final withdrawal demand, and when he refuses, every world watching will know who chose what comes next." Mitchell looked exhausted and composed in equal measure. "Quiet Resolve can redeploy in 41 minutes. We will be there." Volkov gave the order that shifted the war from distributed contest to deliberate culmination. "All fleets vector to Neuralis under Protocol Bastion. Maintain civilian escort screens. Carry full decoy suites. We finish this." Outside, damaged relays and council lights, under cold stars that had watched empires misjudge patience before, human formations turned as one toward the junction where Sam waited with everything he had left. Neuralis Junction filled every screen with geometry built for empire. 3 hyperlane throats converging around a ring of old freight habitats and refueling spines that now sat dark behind Thesari carrier walls. Sam had massed everything that still answered him without hesitation. Heavy war carriers at the center, lance cruisers layered in predatory wedges, boarding tenders tucked behind armored flanks like blades, waiting in folded hands. He did not hide the formation. He wanted the galaxy to watch a public execution. Admiral Elena Volkov gave him the audience and denied him the script. Human fleets emerged on staggered vectors instead of a single line. Reserve groups from classified anchorages sliding into place beside scarred veterans from Kepri. Rail platforms drifting in quiet pairs beyond obvious engagement range. Allied medical ships held far back under marked sanctuary bands, visible on purpose. So were evacuation escorts. Humanity had brought warfighting mass, but it had also brought witnesses to its own rules. At the command table, aboard the flagship Resolute Meridian, Catherine Hayes stood beside Volkov as the final legal transmission went out on open council archive channels. Her voice remained precise even with the junction burning amber on every display. "Hi, Commander Sam. This is Ambassador Catherine Hayes, Terran Compact. You are ordered to withdraw all Thesari combat assets from Neuralis and contiguous human lanes, to release remaining detainees, and to stand down synaptic lance systems for independent verification. Refusal constitutes continued aggression under charter law. This is the final withdrawal demand." Sam answered from his flagship with ceremonial contempt, stretched into theater. "Terran Ambassador, for 2 days you have confused disruption with strength and mercy with leverage. You fracture formations through deceit. You hide behind civilians, and you call your panic doctrine civilization. Hear Thesari judgment without distortion. At Neuralis, disciplined minds will erase your recursive defect. Your fleets will be pacified, and your species will be remanded to supervised status until your dangerous autonomy is corrected. Any vessel that retreats now may retain life under surrender code. Any vessel that remains will be dismantled." Volkov leaned toward the channel pickup. "Refusal recorded." She cut transmission, turned to operations, and gave the first of 3 orders that broke the war. Bastion Phase 1. Calibrated withdrawal. Feed them the corridor they asked for. Human forward elements began to fall back with deliberate unevenness, just enough disorder to trigger Thesari pursuit doctrine. Sam took the bait immediately. Carrier wedges surged into the central throat, lances cycling at saturation tempo, convinced scale would crush precision exactly as he had promised his admirals. For 40 seconds, his projection looked correct. Human lead ships peeled away under heavy fire. One cruiser lost drive control and spun clear, trailing atmosphere. Another took a lance strike across dorsal armor and dropped from command mesh. Then, the corridor changed character. Dr. Sofia Novak triggered the memorial cognition lattice from Reykjavik, battle libraries and command heuristics braided into live doctrine assist across surviving links, laser bursts, and autonomous cell trees. It was not central control. It was shared memory made executable, centuries of near failures, rescue priorities, and enemy pattern studies pushed as contextual prompts to crews already trained to think in fragments. Fear rose. Retrieval rose with it. Constraint and lethality rose together. On quiet resolve, Captain James Mitchell watched his board populate with short recommendation strings keyed to Thesari honor charge signatures. "There," he said, pointing at a converging wedge. "They will commit to center compression in 9 seconds. Lieutenant Anna Becker did not look up from her spectrum bands. Ghost set primed to their threat filters. On your mark. Mark. Resonance decoys pulsed from debris shadows and dead transponders, each tuned to look like a high-probability flank ambush to Thesari, targeting logic. The spearhead split to address phantoms that matched its own training fears. Human ships that had seemed to retreat snapped into pre-plotted kill boxes along the new seams. "Rail groups," Mitchell said, calm as inventory. "Disarm mounts only. Leave habitat sections untouched." Long-range slugs crossed the void in disciplined volleys. Weapon pylons vanished from carrier escorts. Boarding rails sheared away. Sensor crowns collapsed into sparks and spinning metal. Thesari hulls stayed intact where possible, alive, but increasingly blind and toothless. When a carrier rolled to shield a damaged tender, it exposed its lance spine and lost it to 3 human impacts, timed almost leisurely. Sub-Commander Tarek Voss felt the battle tipping before his displays admitted it. Emergency channels were crowded with uncoded panic from neighboring commanders who had lost secure synchronization after repeated decoy interference. Human fire was not random punishment. It was selective amputation. Every minute his formation kept mass, it lost another organ. "Request permission to disengage central throat and regroup on outer ring," he transmitted to Sam. The answer came hard and immediate. "Denied. Advance and crush." Voss looked at the tactical feed where advancing now meant driving intact crews through a corridor mapped by an enemy that kept predicting Thesari reactions with indecent precision. He executed the order for one more pass and lost 2 cutters to gravitic snare fields that bloomed like invisible nets around their vectors, pinning them long enough for rail teams to strip their weapons. 43 minutes into the engagement, human special operations launched. Commander Richard Sullivan's boarding flotilla approached Sam's flagship through maintenance spines exposed by Becker's timed power cycle hack. A ripple in auxiliary grids that forced armored shutters to open and reseal in staggered sequence. Thesari security expected frontal breaching pods. They did not expect quiet inserts through service architecture their own designers considered beneath warrior notice. Sullivan's teams moved fast and unsentimental, sealing bulkheads behind them, tagging surrendered crew for medical retrieval, bypassing command theaters until they reached the primary synaptic core chamber. Charges went to conduit hubs, not life support. On Sullivan's count, shaped blasts cut the core's field regulators and dropped the flagship's cognition warfare suite into cascading failure. Across the junction, the Thesari command coherence imploded. Secure channels died with the core. Emergency bands flooded open and raw. Human cyber neuro teams had prepared for exactly that moment. They poured verification noise and false priority pings into unsecured frequencies, just enough to keep enemy fragments from reassembling. Volkov saw the line break and gave Order 3. Gravitic confinement fields full spread. Pin the carriers, broadcast surrender architecture. Projectors hidden among human reserve barges ignited. Space around the remaining Thesari heavy ships thickened into calibrated wells that bled momentum and locked vectors. Carriers trying to pivot for escape found their mass answering too slowly, then not at all. Human batteries covered every launch bay. Allied observer drones captured all of it in merciless clarity. Hayes opened a general channel to all combatants. Thesari forces at Neuralis, your command network is neutralized, your maneuver space is confined, and your weapon superiority is gone. Power down drives, vent lance capacitors, and transmit surrender identifiers. Crews that comply will receive medical protection and repatriation processing under council law. Some captains obeyed at once. Others hesitated until a human volley removed the last active lance cluster from a holdout carrier without breaching its habitat ring. Then surrender codes began arriving in dense bursts. Sam did not send one. Volkov took a boarding shuttle with 2 Marine squads and crossed to his flagship under cover of her own guns. No one on her team mistook the moment for triumph. It was the narrow space between enemy collapse and enemy desperation, where bad decisions multiplied. They met resistance in 3 corridors, brief and sharp, then reached the command deck, where smoke from overloaded consoles hung in layered gray. Sam stood on his own dais in cracked war harness, one arm plate split, sidearm half drawn before a Marine pulse net slammed it from his grip and magnet locked the weapon flat to the deck. He spat blood to the side and laughed once, a broken metallic sound. "Finish it, human." A warrior defeated is carrion. Volkov stepped within 2 paces, visor open, expression carved from fatigue and discipline. She signaled for all Fleet Live broadcast. "For 200 years we were patient," she said, her voice carrying through every captured and surrendered channel at Neuralis. "We hoped you would choose restraint. You chose invasion. You will face judgment instead of martyrdom." Sam's mandibles tightened. With his uninjured hand, he slammed a coded strike sequence into his command rail, trying to trigger a final lance release from any ship still listening. The rail flashed denial in red across the deck. Captured authentication keys had already revoked his authority and transferred command state to tribunal lockout protocols. For the first time since the council convocation, silence reached him before words did. Around the dais, his surviving officers looked not at Volkov, but at the dead command rail that had just rejected their high commander in front of the galaxy. Sam straightened, as much as cracked armor allowed, then dropped to one knee with a motion that looked less like ritual than structural failure. "The Thesari surrender unconditionally," he said. Volkov held his gaze long enough to make sure the moment was anchored in every witness feed. "Acknowledged. All Thesari units, this is Admiral Elena Volkov, Terran Compact Navy. Surrender terms are now active. Power down all heavy systems, secure your wounded, and await boarding for disarmament and medical triage. Any further hostile action will be treated as individual criminal refusal, not lawful combat." She nodded to her Marines. "Bind restraints. Keep him upright." They locked Sam's arms, scanned for embedded transmitters, and moved him off the dais he had planned to use as theater. In the corridor beyond, human medics passed in the opposite direction toward Thesari casualties, while combat engineers tagged command nodes for evidence preservation. Discipline continued where spectacle ended. On Resolute Meridian, Hayes watched Sam's live transfer feed and allowed herself one controlled breath before returning to the chamber channel. Speaker, Neuralis engagement has ended. The Thesari Primary Command has surrendered unconditionally. High Commander Sam is in Terran custody pending Council War Tribunal transfer. We request immediate convocation for ceasefire certification, detainee accounting, and enforcement authorization. The speaker, who had spent 2 days trying to keep procedure from collapsing under contempt, answered with formal gravity edged by relief. Request granted. Let the record show hostilities at Neuralis have ceased by unconditional surrender of the Thesari Command Authority. In the junction, guns fell quiet in widening rings. One by one, the Thesari carriers vented lance capacitors in pale streams and powered down drives under human overwatch. Rescue tugs crossed lines that had been kill zones an hour earlier. Marine teams swapped breach charges for triage kits. On a maintenance deck below Sam's ruined command chamber, Sub-Commander Voss surrendered his sidearm to a human lieutenant who logged it, tagged it, and pointed him toward medical screening with professional indifference. Mitchell stood on Quiet Resolve's bridge, shoulders finally lowering as tactical icons shifted from red to amber to controlled green. Becker removed her headset and rubbed a burn mark along her wrist, where a console short had kissed skin. Well, she said, dry and exhausted. Their supervised pacification program appears to have encountered a scheduling conflict. Mitchell gave the smallest nod, eyes still on the drifting line of disarmed carriers. Log it under operational irony. Above Neuralis, surrounded by disabled warships and active rescue lanes, Admiral Volkov's shuttle carried a bound High Commander toward tribunal transfer, and the galaxy watched the end of the Thesari certainty happen in real time. The cheering that rose on human channels after the surrender lasted less than a minute before Admiral Volkov shut it down. Operational silence, she ordered. We are done winning. We are now responsible for everyone still breathing in this battle space. On the main display, Neuralis looked like a scrapyard wrapped around a hospital. Disabled Thesari carriers hung in gravitic confinement like stunned animals, lights flickering along their flanks. Human tugs moved between them under transponder beacons set to medical priority. A Marine commander from 3rd Assault requested permission to clear a cluster of departing shuttles that had failed to answer 3 hails. Negative lethal, Volkov said. Track, net, board, disarm. No fire unless fired upon. They are vectoring toward the Thesari core lane, Admiral. That route leads to nursery orbitals. I know where it leads. Disable drives only. Catherine Hayes stood at the secondary console and watched the targeting feed tighten around the fleeing shuttles. A rail officer marked 3 firing solutions that would have vaporized all targets in one pass, then deleted them and switched to precision drive strikes exactly as ordered. The shuttles spun harmlessly, and boarding teams moved in. Across the deck, Minister Olivia Barrett spoke through clenched fatigue that did not hide her anger. We have legal cause for punitive operations against their military infrastructure all the way to their core perimeter. Volkov did not look away from the casualty board. We have legal cause. We do not have moral need. Their war machine is broken. Their command surrendered, and the Council is watching every choice we make. We dismantle capacity, not children. The decision traveled fleet-wide in a single standing directive. No retaliatory bombardment of Thesari nurseries, no targeting of food or life support grids, no coercive reprisals. Medships were reassigned from low-priority human treatment queues to critical Thesari trauma decks, where hull fractures and decompression injuries were still climbing. Human wounded with minor injuries waited on folding cots and passed water packs down the line without complaint, while enemy crews were stabilized first. On Quiet Resolve, Mitchell walked through a temporary holding bay where surrendered Thesari officers sat cuffed to deck rails under guard. The atmosphere smelled of coolant, antiseptic, and hot circuitry. A young Thesari lieutenant flinched when a human medic approached, expecting rough handling. Instead, the medic scanned his thoracic plate fracture, adjusted the splint, and set down a thermal ration. "You will get monitored contact with family after biometric disarmament," she said. "Eat first." The lieutenant stared, then nodded once, confused and ashamed in equal measure. Sub-Commander Voss sat 3 rows down, wrists restrained, posture rigid with the dignity of someone trying not to show relief. Mitchell stopped in front of him. "You requested tactical withdrawal at Kepri to preserve crews," Mitchell said. "My intelligence team found the packet. It mattered." Voss held his gaze. "I also obeyed orders that boarded civilian ships." "You will testify to all of it." "I will." The accountability machinery started before the wreckage cooled. Combat engineers stripped Sam's command deck under chain of custody protocols. His magnet-locked sidearm was photographed, tagged, and sealed in Tribunal Locker 7. The cracked command rail that had rejected his coded strike was removed as a complete assembly and transferred to Council Forensic Custody. Captured authentication keys were escrowed with neutral cryptographers from Pax and Kith, observers present. Becker's resonance emulator logs, Novak's inversion models, and every open band threat from Thesari Command were copied to redundant archives on Earth, Luna, and Council Central, so no one could erase the record later. 9 days after Neuralis, Hayes stood in the Council chamber again, this time with no war harnesses on the Thesari delegation tier because there was no Thesari military caste left to send them. In its place sat a provisional civic delegation under guard, flanked by legal observers and 2 translators whose hands trembled only when Sam entered. He was brought in upright, in plain restraint fields, armor replaced by gray detention fabric. He did not bow. He did not perform. The speaker opened the War Tribunal session, then recognized testimony from recovered detainees first. The 2 missing human research teams appeared by secure holo from a neutral medical station on Thel. Their lead investigator, Dr. Helena Strauss, spoke with clinical precision. "We were held under coercive compliance review, denied counsel, and subjected to repeated neural interface attempts outside consent parameters. We are alive due to delayed escalation at Kepri, which preserved extraction corridors. Neutral physicians have verified no permanent structural damage." That statement closed one thread Hayes had carried since the first convocation. She let herself breathe once, then returned to the legal tablets in front of her. Voss testified after Strauss. The loaded silence that had followed his battlefield hesitations finally paid its debt in open record. High Commander Sam issued explicit orders to deny civilian egress for demonstration value, he said, voice flat. "When I reported that Lance saturation increased Terran cohesion instead of breaking it, he ordered intensified cycles regardless of friendly misidentification risk. At Neuralis, he rejected tactical disengagement that would have preserved the Thesari crews. These choices were political theater presented as military necessity." No one interrupted him. Even Sam stayed still. By the 4th day of hearings, the verdict was procedural, unanimous, and irreversible. Aggressive war, sapient rights violations, coercive neural assault. Sam was sentenced to permanent imprisonment at a council black site facility, overseen by rotating neutral staff and continuous public audit access for legal compliance. He was not executed. The galaxy saw what that restraint cost and what it established. The settlement chamber filled the next morning for ratification of the Neural Sovereignty Accords. Hayes read the operative clauses herself, each one a direct answer to the war's opening crime. Coercive cognition mapping banned, neural weapons prohibited, consent standards expanded to wartime and peacetime alike. Independent monitoring mandated at all border laboratories. Enforcement authority required a guarantor species willing to act and willing to be audited. The vote board lit in cascading bands. Pax, yes. Kith, yes. Valari, yes. Former Thesari client states yes. Provisional Thesari civic delegation, after a long private consultation, yes. Unanimous. The speaker turned toward Hayes with formal gravity. By unanimous ratification, the Terran Compact is appointed Chief Enforcement Guarantor under Council oversight. Hayes inclined her head. Accepted. With audit transparency and reciprocal jurisdiction. Outside the chamber, the practical work began at industrial scale. Thesari fleets were escorted to monitored decommission yards where lance corps were cut out under mixed inspection teams. Military academies tied to the old caste hierarchy were converted into civil navigation institutes. Captured conscripts were returned in staged transports after biometric, disarmament compacts, and identity verification. Every release was logged. Every log was public. At Capri, reconstruction crews reopened the relay ring section by section. The brass-rimmed analog repeater from Quiet Resolve, heat-scarred and still functional, was mounted behind glass in the rebuilt operations gallery with a plain plaque, used during mesh collapse to preserve civilian corridor integrity. Visitors paused in front of it longer than they expected. 3 years later, on a clear cycle at the restored relay, cadets from 12 species stood in a semicircle around Dr. Sophia Novak as freighters moved through open lanes beyond the viewport. Human uniforms mixed with Valari utility sashes, Kith flight harnesses, and the muted civic insignia worn by the first Thesari reform cohort. No one carried war colors. Novak brought up the old neural map Sam had mocked, the recursive loop glowing in pale blue and threat red. This architecture was called a defect, she said. It is a constraint engine. Fear activates memory. Memory activates moral valuation. Moral valuation narrows action to what can be defended after the battle ends. Under stress, that recursion can fail if training fails. So we train. A Thesari cadet raised a clawed hand. If the loop preserves restraint, why does it also improve lethality? Novak nodded, as if she had been waiting for that question. Because restraint removes noise. You stop trying to do everything. You do the necessary thing at the necessary scale. Catherine Hayes watched from the back row beside Mitchell, now an instructor with more gray at his temples, and the same steady posture on a command deck. Through the glass, they could see convoy traffic flowing through lanes once marked as kill zones. A Valari relief ship passed a Thesari agricultural transport, both escorted by a mixed patrol under Accord insignia, and neither altered course. Mitchell spoke quietly. Capri traffic report this morning was boring. Hayes allowed a brief smile. Strategically beautiful. Far above them, a memorial band encircled the relay corps, names etched in human. Thesari, Valari, and Council Standard. Not a monument to conquest, but to thresholds held. On the central pillar, Volkov's standing line had been engraved in 4 languages after unanimous vote. Dismantle the war machine, not the species. No hostile fleets massed at junction mouths. No compliance ultimatums rode civilian channels. The old contempt theater had ended not because everyone had become gentle, but because the cost of violating neural sovereignty and civilian law was now clear, enforceable, and remembered by people trained to act before panic and to stop before cruelty. At shift change, cadets filed out in orderly noise, arguing doctrine and logistics instead of survival odds. Novak closed the display. Hayes and Mitchell stepped onto the gallery walkway where the relay hummed with ordinary traffic, and below them, a new class of pilots began simulation drills built on the same loop that once invited invasion. Memory without paralysis. Power without cruelty. Patience with a boundary. This time, the galaxy did not mistake it for weakness.